Haidong! In this video, we're going to talk about aspects of thrusting focus 2. Now just to make sure we're on the same page, so this is the portion where you're actually moving with your thrusts, right? So in the first one, we have 2 clusters, right? So we're in kimase, and so we're striking the solar plexus and we're striking the throat. For 2 and 3, we're going to be moving and only hitting this first cluster, right? So for the first one, it's going to be walking stance and teirose. So chianse, teirose, or walking stance, long stance. The third one's going to be using sotose and omse. So again, short stance or back stance, or tiger stance technically. Yeah, so let's take a look, right? So one of the first things I want you to consider is one of the more obvious ones, right? So you're moving with it, right? So it's not just you're here and you're like stab, stab, stab. Like, okay, like you need to move, right? So with this one, really think about engaging your whole body and getting your core behind your stab, right? So for example, so just not moving, meh, meh. Okay, like I could maybe puncture, especially if I have a really nice sharp sword. But again, if I'm moving with it, bang, bang, and moving other side, bang, that's gonna be a lot more effective, right? So with this one, there's going to be a couple aspects of this. So think about which muscle groups you're engaging, right? So if I'm here, I'm just walking, no power, right? Because, so first of all, think about where your center of mass is. If your center of mass is kind of like waving off over here and just kind of like not helpful. Versus if you have kind of like centered behind your stab, right? So if I have my tip honed in on my opponent, all my center mass behind it, even a little bit behind my hilt, I can really get underneath and stab, right? And other side, stab. So again, use, again, the proper muscle groups, right? So again, use especially the glutes and the core, right? So you feel like here, right? So if you're here, again, the tip should always be, again, in that center zone. So that's something that we talked about in the first video, right? So it should always be in your general area. So it's here. So you're going to engage, use your hip, especially if you're using walk stance, right? Stepping back, it's horizontal, horizontal, and all that fun stuff. Same thing with teirose, right? So teirose is intended to use all of your power to push into a stab, right? So from here, stab, back, stab, back, stab, back, stab. Make sense? So really engage your muscle groups, right? So especially the glutes for teirose, obviously in walk stance as well. Your core, right? So you really get that behind your stabs, right? And also again, think about which part of your arms you're using, right? So am I kind of like using a lot of elbows, and doing a lot of elbows as I stab? Or am I mostly using, again, the deep shoulder, kind of tuck it back, right? So here, engage your hip and using the bigger muscles, the stab, or am I using a lot of like fingers and a lot of like wrists and stuff? So be very conscientious of the muscle groups that you use and really try to use that forward momentum to really add to the power of puncturing. Another aspect I would like you to think about is your preparation. So I talked a little bit about this with the first video, I believe, right? But make sure like you're so covered as you stab, right? So for example, if I'm down here preparing for a stab, so most likely we're engaged in a sword fight. Here, I'll be able to think about the different parts of the sword, right? So, for example, if I'm grinding into a stab, I don't want to be grinding here, right? Because it's going to be very easy for me to be dislodged, right? So I'm like, nyar. All I need to do is like, and it's easily swerved off, right? Versus, if I'm again nyar, and they're trying to block it here, which obviously if they do, they're too close and they already got stabbed. But if they were having a long sword, this is harder to deflect than this, right? So this is really easy to move one way or the other. This is going to be a lot more difficult, especially if it's going to be two-handed, right? So first of all, be aware of which part you're grinding against, right? So if you're grinding, you'll be using again the middle to the more or less the first half of your sword, right? Now also, think about your guard, right? So allegedly you might be wearing gauntlets when you're actually fighting someone. We also don't want to risk too much of it just being, ricocheting off. But yeah, so if you're here and you're deflecting, make sure you're still covered, right? So my wrist is actually protected by the curve of my sword. My left hand is a little bit open. That's something I can easily protect if I need to. I can easily bring it back if I need to protect my wrist, right? So here, if I'm against someone's sword here, right, and as I'm coming in, I want to make sure that I am protecting myself. So over here, right, and I'm trying to thrust, right, other side, someone's here, deflect, okay, making sure I'm still covered, making sure I'm being able to bore down on it if I really need to, like if someone's really trying to get at me, I can bore down and protect myself. Here, and then stab. Here, right? So maybe you're trying to push it to the side, so then if you do, and you kind of lift it up, so for example, if you're in this guard and they're trying to deflect you this way, if you duck under, the sword's gonna go here, right? But regardless, this is still protecting something, right? So this is protecting especially your wrist, getting it out of the way. Here, bearing down, thrust. Bearing down, thrust. Now with these guys, be particularly careful, right? Because with this, it's very easy to have a nice wrist shot, right, or forearm shot. So from here, this is actually, so at least from my HEMA experience, which is now becoming more and more distant, I will come back, don't worry if HEMA people are watching this. Yeah. But usually with these, you're not grinding, right? This is a maneuver around someone's guard, right? So, but you still want to cover, right? So I don't want to be like, I'm going to stab you. No, right, because I'm not covered at all. Versus if I'm here, I can still protect my head, and if I really need to turn this into a block, it's very easy, right? I can very easily defend myself. So from here, again, coming with that stab, making sure that, again, you're covered. So again, think about your defense even though you're really going all in terms of an offensive stab. And the third aspect I would like you to think about is the geometry of the fight. Right? So now, as is, because in the thrusting focus number 2, everything is going straight forward. Now, obviously, in the real fight, we don't need to do that. In fact, we probably shouldn't do that because it would be very obvious. So one side thing, just for fun, when you see something going straight for you, you immediately react, right? Versus if I kind of still gain that same distance, but I go off on the side, your brain doesn't react the same way, which is actually why in Sangsu 3, so when we have like a 3 to the left, right? So one interpretation of that was actually you're either engaged in a sword fight and you're subtly trying to get away, right? So you're getting back in your cutting distance so you can kill them. But this is the same idea, and boxers use it the same way, right? So if I punch you this way, which was a terrible punch, no, right? Versus if I'm again gaining the same distance, but I'm here, it's not as obvious, right? So again, if you see something going straight on, you react a lot more quickly. That's all different stuff. But think about, again, moving around your target, right? So if you are my target, fair iPhone. So if we're here, if I just go like, I'm going to stab you here, you know where I'm going, right? Versus, so actually I can maybe go off this way. So here, I'm protected, I can maybe go for a rib. No, here, protected, rib. I can also go, again, same side, let me make sure I'm doing this right. I can actually just try to evade and kind of like thrust this way. Although I recommend you cover yourself a little bit more because it's better to be defensive and not die while also being offensive, as opposed to being completely offensive to the point that you're more likely to die. So, yeah. So defend yourself, right? So if I'm here, defend, right? So here, grind in, thrust. Grind in, thrust. Tuck over, thrust. Tuck over, thrust. So again, think about the different ways you can move around a target, and also again, like optimizing your geometry over your opponent. So again, think about the different parts of the sword that you're using against your partner, right? So you want to be, again, stabbing, obviously stabbing with this part, but stabbing, cutting with this part, deflecting and defending with this, right? So if you're really close, you can actually just like make contact and be able to push yourself through if you need to. So take those 3 ideas, right? So now obviously there are things that we're working on with the thrusting focus, but they're all things you should be working on with your sparring and your fighting anyway, right? So these are things, again, you can, grind with this, especially with a partner, right? Because thrusting focus is really good to train with a partner because you can work on, again, nice deflections, right? As well as your own thrusts, right? So again, think about your different angles, right? So when you're sparring, you're not fencer, right? You don't have to be like, ha, aha, aha, right? No, you can be like, aha, 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 right? You can really move around, right? So you can also, again, do jumps around the other person, right? So this is also why we're doing, when you do bamboo, you should be going around the target because you should be constantly moving. So again, use these three aspects, right? So again, think about the muscle groups you're using when you're stabbing, specifically, but obviously with everything else as well. But again, think about the geometry of how you're protecting yourself, right? So you always want to be protected, right, in some way or another, while you're, again, going in for the offensive. But also think about, again, your angles, right? So you still want to be able to hit the opponent while not compromising your own safety. So I guess with that, so keep those ideas in mind, obviously in this drill, right? But also do that in terms of your sparring, your fighting, and also your own form. So again, think about your preparations for your forms, and again, are they defensive or not? So I guess with that, so keep training, stay humble, and stay safe. Haidong!